Did you know that the area around the Salton Sea, California's largest lake, has one of the highest rates of pediatric asthma in the country? Hello, listeners, and welcome to H2O and Beyond. My name is Alex Hahn, and each week we dive into the science, systems, and stories behind the water we use every day. If you haven't listened to our past episode on the Salton Sea, I highly recommend you check it out. It provides some great context for what we're going to be talking about in this episode. But if you haven't, that's okay. I'll catch you listeners all up to speed. So, to help us learn more about the public health risks posed by the Salton Sea, I'm joined by Dr. Mia Maltz, a professor of microbial biology and soil health from the University of Connecticut. Let's dive in. Hey, Dr. Maltz, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So, something I like to ask my listeners before we get started is, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and the place you work at.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a mycologist. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut, and mycology is the study of fungi. So I study fungi and microbes, and I'm a teacher. I teach soil science and microbial ecology.
Is it fungi or fungi? I never really knew the answer.
Some people say fungi, some people say fungi. So yeah, just however you say it, just say it with authority.
So what's your background story? How did you get into this field?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in mushrooms, and when I started to learn about how fungi were capable of biodegrading contaminants and pollutants, I got really interested in their potential for restoration. So I've been working in a number of different systems and doing some different restoration and bioremediation projects with fungi.
Yeah, and so I'm not really familiar with microbial ecology, and I don't know if our listeners are either. So could you explain to our listeners what it is?
Sure, yeah. So microbial ecology is the study of microorganisms and how they interact with each other and how they interact with their environment, what sort of an effect they have on their environment, and how they respond to different kinds of environmental cues.
Great, thank you for that. And so the topic for today's episode is the Salton Sea. And I want to ask, what's your relation to it? I know you're in Connecticut right now, so why did you choose to study it?
Well, I was in California for a long time. And when I moved down to Southern California from Northern California, I realized what a big issue the Salton Sea was in terms of it being shrinking and causing a lot of plumes of dust and it being really an environmental disaster. So I started to learn about it and try to evaluate what sort of an effect it's having on the residents of the ecosystem, as well as what kind of what we could expect in the future.
So, I want to ask, why are you in, Connecticut right now? Is it because your, work with the Salton Sea has, finished, or?
I'm not working as much with the Salton Sea. I'm still working with families that have children with asthma and working with community health practitioners to be able to evaluate the dust inside the dwellings of houses that live by the Salton Sea. And I have a grant from the University of Connecticut to work on that. But I moved out to Connecticut because I got this job as a professor at UConn, and I thought it was a great opportunity. So I continued doing it. But my work with the Salton Sea does continue.
That's great to hear that you're still helping out the community over there. Now, for you listeners who haven't listened to the past episode, I'll provide a little bit of context on what the Salton Sea is. So it's an endorheic lake located 230 feet below sea level in Southern California in what I believe is Imperial County. So it has no drainage point or outlet to the ocean. And so over time, the salinity level has naturally risen to around 2 times that of the Pacific Ocean at this point, I think. And so these lake levels, they're usually maintained by agricultural runoff. But in recent years, I think changes in water rights have actually diverted the water to urban centers like San Francisco and those cities on the coast. And so what happens when, farmers stop using this water to irrigate their land, you actually expose the lake bed when the lake starts shrinking. And the dust from the lakebed gets kicked up by the wind, and this dust contains things like the fertilizers that the farmers have used in the past to irrigate their crops. And so you can probably imagine what happens when you actually breathe this dust in. It's nothing good. And so it actually brings me to why I invited Dr. Maltz onto the podcast today to talk about what exactly happens when you breathe that dust in. So, Dr. Maltz, let's talk about your research. Can you give us a little rundown, a quick summary of what exactly it is that you studied about the Salton Sea?
Yeah, so I worked with a team of researchers. Many of them were out of Emma Aronson's lab in UC Riverside, and we collected dust from different locations around the Salton Sea and then from locations that were further from the sea. And we brought that dust back to the lab and we analyzed it and we created an environmental chamber where we exposed mice to that dust and we evaluated the effects on the mice, on their immune system, and we studied their microbiome.
And what exactly is a microbiome? I know like gut microbiomes exist, and I read like some of your research. You guys talk a lot about the lung microbiome, and I'm not really familiar with that. What is it?
Yeah, so the microbiome is a collection of microorganisms interacting with their environment. So it could be any environment, large or small. You could have a microbiome just on, one body part, like your ear, or you can have a microbiome of an entire ecosystem or biome. So the microbiome that we studied, we did look at the gut microbiome, but we also looked at the lung microbiome and the microbes that are inside the lung. And one thing that's interesting is that we used to think the lungs were a sterile place, that there
Uh-huh.
weren't any microbes in the lungs. But now that we've been studying it, we realize there are healthy resident microbiome in the lungs, and breathing in the dust does disrupt that balance.
Yeah, and so from I'm just gonna recap a little bit. So you guys went out to the Salton Sea, and then you took dust samples from like various distances, right? And then you exposed mice to the dust from these different distances.
Mhm.
So how exactly did you collect this dust? What was the
We
process?
used these bundt pans. They're like
Hmm.
baking dishes that have a hole in the center, and we filled them with um, quartz marbles, and then we put them out, and we collected usually for about a month at a time, high above the soil surface onto poles. So we would suspend them up high, and then we would collect the dust that's settled into the pans.
What role do the quartz marbles play in this experiment?
Yeah, so since they're circular or spherical,
Hmm.
they roll along each other and have a lot more surface area than if we were just going to collect in the pan by itself. And they're sterile, so
Hmm.
anything that gets collected there, we collect it off of the marbles.
Oh, so how exactly do you collect it off of these marbles?
Yeah, great question. So we rinse it with sterile water, and
Hmm.
then we take the water and we filter the water, and then we use the material that filtered through to be able to then aerosolize and expose the mice to the aerosols.
Oh, I see. So you guys actually the dust collects on the surface of the marbles.
Yes.
Oh, it's actually pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, um like the way I think about it when people talk about collecting dust, I just imagine them taking like like some cup or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, I
Right.
never thought of using the quartz marbles. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's a neat technique. We do it up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, as well as other locations around to be able to collect dust and see what kind of differences there are in the dust and the microbial community inside the dust.
How long did you expose these mice to the dust for?
So usually we do about a week. We've done some
Hmm.
48-hour exposures, but we don't usually expose them much longer than a week.
Yeah, and so I read an article, I think by UC Riverside, and it talked about how you use some technique that you've been developing for a couple of years, like on how to isolate microbial DNA from like the host tissue.
Yeah.
Could you explain like the relation between that to this experiment?
Sure, yeah. So we tried many different protocols to be able to get the microbial component separate from the host component. And we finally figured out that doing a series of centrifuging, so centrifugation and mechanical disruption using a bead beater to be able to break up the cells. And we collaborated with Zymo Biomics, who's a biotech company out of Irvine, California. And some of our colleagues there had developed this kit called Host Zero. So we
Hmm.
used the Host Zero kit. We modified it by doing more mechanical disturbance and more centrifugation and disruption to be able to separate the host cells from the microbial cells. And then we isolated the DNA from the microbes.
Yeah, and so are you guys like once you expose the mice to to this dust, how do you actually like get access to like the stuff inside of their lungs?
Yeah, so we do a few different things. One is through a technique called BALF, which is bronchoalveolar lavage. It's like a
Mhm.
wash to wash the lungs. And then we can work with the BALF, the bronchoalveolar lavage. But oftentimes we um, euthanize the mice and dissect the lung tissue
Mhm.
from the mice bodies.
Okay, which one did you guys use? Which technique?
We did both of them.
Mhm. And as for the results, how are they looking?
Yeah, so we did find that dust from further from the sea
Mhm.
were very similar to the control exposures to just fresh air. And the dust that was collected close to the sea, that was actually causing much more heightened immune response, and it changed the structure of the microbiome.
Yeah, and these results. I know you conducted these tests on mice. Can they be like? Can you draw conclusions from these on like how it would affect a human?
I think so. Yeah, the
Mhm.
mammalian respiratory system is pretty similar to the mouse, so the murine model, and we can draw some conclusions of how other mammals respond to the dust, and certainly the study was done in mice, but it is applicable to be able to explore how humans might respond given these same sorts of exposures.
I see. And what were the data points that you guys collected? Was it like percentage of outside microorganisms in the lungs, or what was the data point?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So we looked at the microbes that were in the lungs, and we also looked at the neutrophil recruitment, so the
Mhm.
immune cells that the mice recruited in the BALF. And we compared them to the mice that had been exposed to the fresh air.
I see. And do you have data on if this dust is more harmful if inhaled by an adult versus like a child, or is this something you'd like possibly look into in the future? Because something similar is happening to the Great Salt Lake right now, and there's articles over there saying like, hey, these kids are inhaling much more of this toxic dust from the Great Salt Lake than these adults. So I want to wonder, like, are you guys doing anything on that right now?
Well, some of the things that we've looked at are looking at younger mice versus older mice. We've also looked at whether you pre expose the mice to some sort of um, uh, substance that exacerbates the response. So, like a pre-sensitization, if they were exposed to the Salton Sea dust first, and then later see how they respond to other sorts of aerosolized substances. But um, yeah, it's sort of tricky to be able to um, know whether the children are more sensitized to it or whether they've been actually desensitized to it from growing up in that area, and how that affects them later on in life.
Yeah, and would you ever be interested in going to the Great Salt Lake and studying how their dust affects the microbiome of the lungs?
Sure, yeah, I have some colleagues that are out there that are
Hmm.
looking at the dust in general at the Great Salt Lake, and mostly the geochemistry of the dust. But my postdoc advisor, David Lowe, who is one of the main people who got me involved with this in the School of Biomedical Sciences out at UC Riverside, he has some colleagues also at the Great Salt Lake, and I think there's possibility of some collaborations moving forward.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I'm not an expert on the Great Salt Lake dust. Is there like any like I know one of the main components of their dust is I think arsenic. What are the main components of the dust at the Salton Sea?
Well, the ones that are really high in organic matter are the ones that seem to be the most irritating um, to inhale.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, there's a lot of selenium in the dust in the Salton Sea as well.
And by organic matter, what could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So, when microbes biodegrade organic material, they form what's called organic matter. And the organic matter is a component of the soil. It's usually about like 5% of the soil. And that organic matter um, it could be a good thing in terms of creating soil structure.
Hmm.
Um, but it also could be the residues of microbes, like microbial cells that had sloughed off and had biodegraded, and some of the substances that those microbes produce, like lipopolysaccharides or LPS, could be toxic and exacerbate some of these immune and respiratory responses.
Oh, so is the problem actually not as big of like, the fertilizer runoff that's been in the lake? So you guys actually found that the organic matter inside is actually the problem?
Well, we did find that when there was higher organic matter, there
Hmm.
was a higher immune response, but it's not to say that the pesticides and the fertilizers aren't causing health effects. We've been doing some analysis of the dust, and we've also been looking to see what sort of residues are there. But yeah, we haven't done any like direct sort of fertilizer or pesticide exposures.
So is this like organic matter present in every single lake across America, or is this something like just a Salton Sea thing?
It's present in all
Hmm.
soil. So it's just that the microbes that are being exposed as the lake is shrinking. So the sediment that's at the bottom of the lake is becoming exposed, and there's microbes and whole microbial communities that are being exposed as well. So some of those microbes may be deleterious.
Oh, okay. So I see. What is it? As the lake shrinks, the microbes at the bottom get exposed to like organic matter, right? And then that dust comes up. Is that?
Yeah, they get exposed to the air,
Mhm.
and the organic matter and the microbial residues get aerosolized, and then they get inhaled.
Yeah. By the way, where does this like organic matter like come from? Is it just like from like dying fish in the salt? Because I know they have a lot of dying fish. Is it somehow connected?
Yeah, there's dying fish that's and waterfowl as well. Um, but organic matter is a part of every soil,
Okay.
so it's there's probably a lot of residue that's built up in the Salton Sea, and then that gets aerosolized.
I see. And now that you guys have proof of these mice being exposed to this dust, it's harmful to them. How like who do you plan on spreading this information to? Is there like an organization like the California Park Service, for example? What are you guys planning to do with this data?
Huh, that's a good question. So we just published a paper in Hemisphere,
Mhm.
and we have another paper that we're putting together, so in academic journals. But we also have a forum every year called the Salt, or I think it's every 2 years, called the Salton Sea Summit, and that's a great way of bringing community members together with scientists to be able to spread the word. It's wonderful that you're covering these stories and getting it out in podcasts. We've also been collaborating with this group. Unidas del Salud. And Unidas del Salud is a collection of community health practitioners, and they've been working with families that have been affected by the Salton Sea, and they've been creating some community forums as well. So while it would be great to share it with the National Park
Mhm.
Service and other groups like through the Center for Conservation Biology at UC Riverside, we've also been doing some grassroots work with communities and community forums.
Yeah, and I think it's working. I think I discovered Dr. Lowe's paper through the Salton Sea Summit. So yeah, I've been reading those. I find them
Oh,
pretty
that's
interesting.
great.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'm sorry if I forgot to cover this earlier, but I know a lot of your research focuses on something called LPS. What is that?
Oh, lipopolysaccharides.
Hmm.
So yeah, we it's residues from particular microbes, from gram-negative microorganisms that
Okay.
have components of the cell wall, the lipopolysaccharides, and the LPS is a component of that, and it's basically like a fingerprint of dead microbes, the residues of the microbial cells.
Oh, okay. So it's just what is it? When these cells die, they leave behind LPS. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. And you guys measured like LPS concentration like inside the lungs, or that's what you guys did, right?
Well, we actually Dr. Lowe has been doing some research with LPS in a few other contexts, and uh, we got LPS just as a separate substance, and we exposed the mice to the LPS, and we saw a really extreme responds with the neutrophil recruitment. And when we looked at a different substance, alternaria, that's a fungus. We looked to see if how alternaria affects the mouse immune response and microbiome. We saw that it was very different, and the Salton Sea dust had a very similar signature in how it affected the mice as the LPS did. So we think that it's probably a portion of the LPS inside the dust that's causing this immune response.
Oh, okay. I think that's pretty interesting. So you can actually compare dust from other areas and see if it causes like if the dust from the Salton Sea caused a similar reaction in the mice, and then you can conclude that the substance
Yeah,
of the other dust was present, right?
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something called a neutrophil. What is that?
Oh, these are immune cells. So
Okay.
they're immune cells that the mice produce, and we produce them as well when we're fighting off an infection or some sort of disease.
So you guys, um, so that one of the data points you measured, like how many like neutrophils were present inside the lungs?
Yeah, the neutrophils that were recruited, absolutely.
Does that give you like a sense of the severity of how many microbes are inside the lungs, or what does this data point tell you?
Yeah, yeah. So it gives you a sense of how the immune system is mounting a response to the dust. And there's a type of asthma that's non-allergic asthma, that's a neutrophilic asthma. So it's like an asthmatic inflammation that's non-allergic.
So wait, asthma being like non-allergic, could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so there's allergic asthma, which leads to the recruitment of eosinophils, which
Okay.
are other immune cells. But this asthma leads to the recruitment of neutrophils, and in some cases, it can be an even more severe asthma, asthmatic inflammatory response.
And the asthma that most people like, if they say they have asthma, is which type of asthma is it that they
It's
usually have?
mostly allergic. Yeah,
Okay.
the eosinophilic asthma.
So it's not the one that recruits neutrophils.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting. And so what's being done right now to protect people at the Salton Sea from the dust? Is there like are there any projects or?
Yeah. So um, this Unidas Del Sol, Del Salud, that group is doing some really
Mhm.
interesting work with families. But I'm not really sure about what is going on these days besides the work that Unides por Salud is doing.
I see. And what years were your research during? How many years ago was it? How long did this take?
Yeah, so we were doing research probably from 2017 through 2024.
Hmm. Okay. And in your professional opinion, like, is it safe to visit the Salton Sea? Because I know Dr. Lowe, I read one of his interviews. He actually said he would not recommend visiting unless you wear like an N95 mask if you go there. So what's your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Um, well, I think visiting is okay.
Mhm.
Short burst of exposure, but I do have some concerns about people that are chronically exposed to the dust.
And the people living in this area, is it like marginalized communities or?
Yeah, there's a lot of marginalized communities, lots of migrant and immigrant
Mhm.
farm workers, and uh, people that are living in manufactured homes um, and such. There's also, thriving communities that are there as well. It's just really challenging when you feel that there's a threat. That's something that you are just breathing in or
Mhm.
inhaling that you probably want to stay inside during these dust events when it's very windy and protect yourself and your family.
And have you guys done study on like how far the dust from the Salton Sea actually travels? Like, will this affect the other major cities like in neighboring counties?
We have done some studies with that. We used what's called transport modeling to be able to measure the trajectory of the dust
Hmm.
from the sea to different areas. And it changes throughout the year. It goes in different directions and changes
Hmm.
throughout the year. But it does seem like Palm Desert might be more protected and Palm Springs might be more protected from salt and sea dust just due to the natural topography.
And you mentioned, I think I might have read an article on this. The transport model, it's like a compute. Is it the computer model that
Yeah, high
scientists have
split
done? Okay.
modeling. Uh-huh.
Do you have any idea like how they developed that, or?
No, it's not really my area, but we do have a paper that we're working on that includes some of these back trajectories and
Mhm.
high split models.
Okay, that's nice. And
Yeah, Dr. Will Porter at UC
oh,
Riverside's been
okay.
doing some really interesting work.
Yeah, I think I might check that out later.
Yeah, you should. He'd be great to have on the show.
And if no major action is taken, like what do you think the future of the Salton Sea looks like 10 to 20 years from now?
Well, I definitely think that it's going to be shrinking. The
Hmm.
footprint of the sea is going to shrink. And in doing so, it's going to expose much more dust or playa from the lake bed as it recedes. And it's um, like 10 or 20 years from now, it's probably going to be substantial shrinking. We did a story map using GIS to be able to see how the sea is shrinking and to predict how much the footprint is going to shrink. And it does seem like there's going to be a lot more lake bed that's exposed, which is probably going to cause more risks for inhabitants of the region.
I see. And do you think like the sea can be saved and all the public health issues just magically go away? Because I noticed save the sea, the farmers will have to start using more water, right?
Yeah, we'll need more water input. So, you're right that water input decisions that were made really changed the amount of fresh water that was
Hmm.
going into the sea. So that was also a decision that was made that led to a lot of the shrinking when the water diversion was shifting. Um, but I would say that the sea itself is going in the direction of shrinking, and I think
Hmm.
it's going to take a lot more to sort of save the sea. But what we can do is do restoration around the shore and try to reduce the dust that's being emitted, and maybe try to do mulching strategies or various techniques to be able to try to protect um, the inhabitants of the region from the plumes of dust.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned these restoration strategies. What is like, I know you said something about mulching. What is that?
Mulching is when you take um, pieces of woody material, like
Hmm.
there's a lot of date palm um, uh, orchards in the area. You could take those palm fronds and grind it up and make sort of a more fine woody base to cover up the
Okay.
soil, and that'll keep some of the water down and or keep some of the water at the surface and be able to help um, prevent it from blowing away and stuff like that.
So you put these pieces of wood on the exposed lake bed. Is that it?
Yeah, you can put this mulch on the exposed lake bed, and you can use landscape fabric or various things like that, and do different plantings of native plants to be able to hold it down. You could even add native fungi and microbes, and try to build the soil so that it's more rooted and less likely to become entrained into air currents and blow away.
You mentioned fungi, and I know that that's what you're currently working on at the University of Connecticut. Is this something you're studying right now, like how fungi can be used to help these restoration efforts in the Salton Sea?
Yeah, I'm not doing any work on that at the moment, but
Hmm.
it's something that I'd be interested in trying to do some research on in the future.
See, and I'm just curious, like, what type of research are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on a bunch of different projects. A few of them are contaminated yards where there's really high heavy metals and a lot of organopollutants, and looking at using fungi and plants to be able to um, biodegrade or hyperaccumulate some of those contaminants and then be able to restore the landscape. I'm also working on some work with fire, looking at post fire landscapes and how
Hmm.
microbial inoculation can help restore ecosystem function post fire, as well as a few other projects with compost and rock dust and building soil.
Yeah, I mean, all these ecological restoration like type projects that you're doing seem really interesting. I mean, I think I might ask you and keep me updated later. I'd
Sure,
be really interested in hearing about that.
absolutely.
And what can listeners like after listening to our episode, like if they want to do something about this issue, is there anything they can do?
Well, I think just educating themselves about what's happening and being able to support um, legislation that would help to um, restore some of the landscapes around the sea. There's also lithium mining that's happening at the sea, which is a really big issue. A lot of the residents are really concerned about it because it's drilling for the lithium, and that we use it, in our cell phones, and we use it in our car batteries and stuff, but it's also uh, has the potential to cause even more destruction by the sea. So I think just educating themselves and being able to figure out where they stand on certain issues around the sea, and being more engaged would be really helpful.
Oh, and what's interesting is that actually next, I think this Monday I have an interview with someone talking about the lithium mining that's going on at
Oh,
the sea.
that's
Yeah.
really great. I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, so I mean, listeners, if you're watching the episode right now, definitely go check that out next week when that episode releases. It's with
Great.
I think Dr. Michael McKibben he's actually from UC Riverside too. So
Great. Oh, that's
yeah, I
fantastic.
managed to get him on the show.
Good.
And well, Dr. Maltz, as we wrap this episode up, is there anything else that you'd like to say to our listeners?
I think that it's important to realize that microbes serve many functions in ecosystems. They're not just pathogens. Many of them are also beneficial, like in probiotics or for restoration. So, being able to think about the whole microbial universe as something that is diverse unto itself is probably what I want to leave you with.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Maltz. And thank you for being a guest on H2O and Beyond today. It was a pleasure having you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, listeners, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. And, I'll post a link to Dr. Maltz's website in the episode description below so you guys can keep updated with her work and learn more about, what she does and her research. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with your coworkers and friends. And feel free to drop some episode suggestions in the Google form link down in the description below. And as always, make sure to stay connected with the H2O and Beyond socials. I'll have them all linked in the episode description as well. And make sure to check out our link tree. I'm Alex. Thank you for listening to H2O and Beyond. Stay curious and stay hydrated.